way of putting it. How does it sort of fit into, what are the chances that Gwadar can become the next big thing as far as, global development is concerned, as a route for transit, as a route for trade, uh, and as a place where fortunes are made in the way that other places in the Middle East have sort of emerged, like Doha, like Dubai, like Abu Dhabi, etc. But we wanted to take a sort of a different route and sort of look at it more from the perspective of a place which is peripheral as far as the nation state is concerned. And we'll talk about what we mean by the term periphery as well. And this notion of what we refer to in the paper as outsourced development, what that means for Chinese actors, what that means for the local political economy and local power structures, and what it means for people who are living in this place called Gwadar as well. Because once again, when we talk about the BRI and when we talk about China, a lot of the literature sort of completely erases the people who live on the ground from any sort of discussion or any sort of discourse. So through this paper, one of the things that I wanted to do is to sort of bring back those people as well into this discussion on the Belt and Road Initiative, on these projects that are taking place in different parts of the world. So I know that David's team has put up a wonderful poster, and it sort of tells us where Gwadar is, but I just wanted to flag that once again. Uh, so that arrow that you can see on the screen points towards this small little spot on the map, which is located in Balochistan province. Balochistan province, interestingly, is Pakistan's largest province by area. However, in terms of population, it has the smallest sort of population, and you can see how that sort of pans out on this map as well. The green areas are, of course, the centers of agricultural production, and that is where a large majority of the population of the country lives. What makes Gwadar interesting and what gives it this sort of a larger than life geostrategic sort of importance is its geographic location, which is right at the mouth of the extremely strategic Strait of Hormuz. And the Strait of Hormuz, of course, is interesting. It's in the news nowadays as well, uh, right next to the Red Sea, because a large or substantially large portion of global energy supplies, including oil, as well as more in the recent past, liquid petroleum gas, passes through these straits. So the importance or the geographic location of Gwadar is quite important as far as global, geostrategic and geopolitical emerging great power competition is concerned. So the question that we want to answer is that a lot of the literature which is on CPEC and which is on the broader Belt and Road Initiative sort of highlights the importance of Gwadar. A lot of the literature, when we look at it from the American sources as well, they talk about Gwadar, its importance, how it could be used as a sort of dual use port, and how it's so important. Same is the case with the Chinese. There are a lot of sources that talk about the importance of Gwadar, the fact that it has so much traction, it has so much importance as far as the Belt and Road Initiative is concerned. And within Pakistan, of course, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it's usually, in the literature, identified as the flagship project of the Belt and Road Initiative. So CPEC is important as far as the BRI is concerned, and CPEC revolves around Gwadar as well, because this is the western sort of terminus, as far as southwestern sort of terminus, as far as the physical sort of corridor is concerned. So the way that we've gone about working on this project is through a lot of a lot of in-depth field work. Uh, so we've looked at or we've analyzed the public sector development spending. Every year, the government of Pakistan has this document called the Public Sector Development Program, where it lays out the amount of money that it's going to spend on development projects across different parts of the country. And this is money that is spent by the federal government. So for this paper, we've analyzed the spending patterns in Gwadar during this period from 2013, when the Belt and Road Initiative was launched, through to 2022. We've also been able to access the official sort of negotiation documents uh, that are routinely, documented, but they're not in the public domain, uh, that cover the sort of relationship between Pakistan and China. And on top of these government documents, we've had two rounds of data collection in Pakistan. The first round was a field visit where I was lucky enough to go to Gwadar in 2019. And then I was able to augment this field visit through interviews primarily with elite actors based in Islamabad, the capital. We had another round of data collection in 2023. I wasn't able to go to Gwadar for these interviews. However, we were able to get quite a good mixture of local actors and local, sort of locally grounded people who were aware of what's going on. And this included bureaucrats, this included academics, local politicians, journalists, and representatives of the NGO. So that's the kind of question that we seek to answer and the data sources that we've used to inform our analysis. All right. So let's go back. Let's take a step back and try and unpack this sort of peripheral nature of Gwadar within Pakistan as well. As I said to you earlier, Balochistan is the largest province by area. However, in terms of population, it's the smallest. So the Baloch, whose name, who sort of, who after whose name Balochistan is named, uh, are a small percentage of Pakistan's overall population, because Balochistan, uh, the population comprises of both Pashtuns as well as the Baloch. So, in terms of Pakistan's total population, the Baloch would be probably around 3 to 4 odd percent. Uh, and it is not only an ethnic periphery, it is also a geographical periphery. So, the distance between, for example, Islamabad and the capital and Gwadar is probably around 2,000 odd or 3,000 odd kilometers. So, very much a geographical periphery as well. Um, and it has been treated in that way as well, as we talk about. The state's presence in Gwadar and in large parts of Balochistan has historically been largely limited as well, which sort of further adds to this notion of peripherality as far as Gwadar is concerned. There was an initial sort of understanding that this place is strategically important. So, for example, there's a paper that was published in 2014, which talks about how uh, already Pakistan's strategic, people who were taking care of Pakistan's strategic needs at that time saw Gwadar as being strategically important as far as its location is concerned. And then around 2000, when the late military dictator Pervez Musharraf came into power, there was a sort of discovery of this military as well as strategic importance that Gwadar had. And this is the period, and so further on, moving on peripherality, um, the mainstream perceptions, if one goes to urban areas in Pakistan, in Punjab or places, or to Lahore or places like Karachi, there's a lot, there's a perception that the backwardness that you see in these peripheral areas within places like Balochistan is because of the backwardness of the people rather than because of an exploitation of the state. So scholars like Akhtar And others have pointed out that this sort of notion that these people are inherently backward is sort of deeply ingrained as far as the psyche of a majority of urban uh, Pakistanis are concerned, especially those that live in the more central sort of location of Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi. Uh, and Gwadar Port's construction, when it began, was very much viewed as a symbol of how the state is bringing development to an area which is backward. And it's not backward because of a lack of funding by the state, but it is backward because of the character of the local elite. And this character of the local elite is based on a narrow understanding or a narrow belonging to tribalism, to the tribe as opposed to the nation. It's a primitive sort of a, of belonging once again to the tribe as opposed to the nation. And these peoples want to ensure that these peripheral peoples who are living in these areas like Gwadar, they remain underdeveloped, right? And frequent examples that are given of this sort of underdevelopment is the opposition to education, especially women's education within those areas. So those are the kind of tropes, or those are the kind of notions of peripherality that we see as far as mainstream Pakistan is concerned about Gwadar. And as I said, this has been uh, promoted perhaps in many ways by the state as opposed to, sort of bringing it or sort of changing this sort of discourse over the last couple of decades. So Gwadar Port, the story starts off in 2002. The Pakistanis, as I mentioned earlier, wanted or sort of realized that this place has strategic importance around earlier periods as well. However, around 2000, they wanted to start something on this in this area, and but there was no money coming, right? So in 2001, we know was one of those sort of tectonic changes that took place as far as the world is concerned. There was no money. The Pakistani state did not have any resources as well. And in 2002, President Musharraf went to China and he sought Chinese funding for this port. Uh, and the Chinese happily obliged, and funding was provided for the construction of a port at this place called Gwadar. The construction contract was given to China Communications Construction Company Limited. It's one of the largest state-owned enterprises within China and one of the largest construction firms in the world as well. The first phase of the project, or the port's first phase, got completed in 2007, early 2007. And interestingly enough, rather than handing over the port to a Chinese firm to operate, uh, the Pakistanis handed it over to a consortium of both local as well as international firms. And one of the reasons that the literature sort of points towards why this happened is because of pressure from the United States, because from 2001 to 2009, Pakistan was, of course, one of the frontline states as far as the war on terrorism was concerned. So the United States was very, very, sort of it was worried about what would happen if the Chinese gained a foothold in this place, especially in the backdrop of the war on terror. So rather than handing it over to the Chinese, and the Chinese weren't really very, sort of weren't very open about taking over the port as well. So rather than handing it over to the Chinese, the Port of Singapore Authority, one of the largest, once again, port operators in the world, stepped in. However, this was not the Port of Singapore Authority alone that sort of bid on this project. They worked with local partners, which included the Dedi Group, one of those groups that gained a lot of prominence when Musharraf came into power, and the National Logistics Cell. The National Logistics Cell is an organization that is very close to the Pakistani military, and it is headed by a serving member of the Pakistan military, even though it reports to the Prime Minister directly. But that's the consortium that comes in to sort of run the port. And again, it's important for us to remember that 2007 Gwadar is the port, right? So it's a backwater, sleepy fishing town where there's no link to electricity as well, right? So from 1999, electricity to Gwadar and to this wider area was provided or came from Iran. This area was not linked to the national grid as well, national electricity grid as well. You did not have access to Pakistani radio in this place, and Pakistani television as well was access was patchy. So that's the kind of period that we're talking about, and that's the kind of peripherality that we're talking about as well. Uh, Now, over the years, so it was expected, once again, the narrative around Gwadar that the Pakistani state, sort of used or espoused was one of development, right? That we're going to build this port. This port is for you, for the people of Gwadar, and it is going to bring about a change in your life because we're going to do a lot of things. We're going to put a lot of money, and that is going to completely transform your lives. Uh, well, it did lead to some changes, but not that many. And we can talk about what those changes were in the Q&A session as well. So the impact of this port's construction on the local population was extremely limited. So, a report that was published by the Planning and Development Department of the Government of Balochistan and in conjunction with UNICEF highlights among the problems the availability of clean drinking water. So, there was no access to clean drinking water. Gwadar had no sanitation. Road networks remained extremely rudimentary. There were no employment opportunities that were generated as well. And employment are worth mentioning from the perspective of the issues of the citizen. Despite the completion of mega development projects, there has been no effective impact to the lives of the common people. So again, despite the fact that the promise was that this port coming into operation is going to bring uh, a wholesale change as far as people's lives are concerned within this area, that change, despite the fact that there was a 4-year period that was spent between the port being completed and this report coming online, there was no change that took place. The Port of Singapore Authority was supposed to build a free zone and build all sort of new infrastructure, which would have made Gawada, the sort of trading, a trading post that was, globally connected, etc. That did not happen. Uh, why did that not happen? Now, when you talk to the Pakistani authorities, they're like, the PSA did not invest in the project. They were meant to invest X amount of dollars in developing the infrastructure, in developing the sort of free zone, and in sort of raising the profile of Gwadar, which they did not do. When you talk to the other side, the PSA, they argue uh, that they were not given access to the land that they were promised in terms of developing the free zone, in terms of bringing about the infrastructure that was required. Now, who owned that land? That's a very pertinent question that comes to mind. Uh, Based on Filippo Boni's work, a book that he published in 2019, interestingly enough, the land around the port was controlled by the Pakistan Navy, and they did not want to hand over land to the PSA-led consortium. And what makes this story more interesting is that the consortium itself includes a military run organization as well, right? So I mentioned the National Logistics Cell. The National Logistics Cell, as I mentioned earlier as well, is staffed to a large extent by serving officers of the Pakistan Army. It is headed by a serving officer of the Pakistan, senior serving officer of the Pakistan Army as well. So then it's interesting to note that these simplistic notions of how things get done, even when there's a when there is an institutional um, homogeneity at the top, uh, are proved false because the Navy has its own organizational interests, which might not be congruent with the organizational interests of the NLC, even though both of these organizations are part of the wider sort of military establishment within the country. So that's one of the interesting things to think about when we're doing this sort of research as well. Our story then goes on to 2013. In 2012, this consortium leaves the project. So they hand over the project back to the government of Pakistan, and they're like, we don't want to um, this concession, we don't want to continue with this concession, which was for 40 odd years, but they leave after 5 to 6 years. And in 2013, a very, not a very well known Chinese firm called the China Overseas Port Holding Company, the COPHC, comes in and takes over uh, this uh, this takes over the port and is given the sort of license to operate the port by the government of Pakistan. Now, Jan 2020, 2022 argues that COPHC is also affiliated with CCCC. There's no other evidence that's available if you go to the COPHC's website. There's no clear indication of who the eventual owner is. However, Chang argues that it is the CCCC that controls the port. So again, CCCC, sorry?
CCCC.
It's the China Communication Construction Company Limited.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So the CCCC, China Communication, let's call it China Communication. That CCCC sounds strange. So China Communications is an interesting actor in this story as well. And 2013, of course, coincides with the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative as well. The revenue sharing agreement is quite lopsided as well, and this comes under a lot of criticism in Pakistan. So the revenue sharing is that 91% of whatever is earned through the port's operation goes to the COPHC, and 9% of the amount goes to the government of Pakistan. And in turn, a COPHC promises to do all of the things that PSA failed to do. So it's going to rehabilitate the port because, of course, since its construction, it's not being used as much as would have been possible. And the free zone, it promises to develop and operationalize the free zone as well. So the zone, the sort of industrial zone, which is going to feed the port as well. And COPHC invests in rehabilitating the port as well. And it raises, so it has access to, of course, funding which PSA perhaps did not do in the same sort of way. So the COPHC raises money from the China Development Bank to invest in the free zone. And Gwadar in 2015, so our story then goes to 2015 when the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is officially launched, even though by 2013, both sides had started talking about a corridor which runs all the way from Xinjiang, from Kashgar. Sorry, is there a question? All right. So they'd already started talking about a corridor that runs all the way from Xinjiang through to Gwadar. And Gwadar then becomes sort of critical as far as the CPEC is concerned. And the idea is that you'll have a multimodal transport network, which includes roads, railways, and pipelines. And it sort of fits into the Pakistani state's own narrative as well. So since the 90s, the Pakistani state wanted to have access to Central Asia, wanted to ensure that Central Asia uses Pakistan as a conduit for its trade. Um, that could not happen in the past, both because of the uncertainty and the violence in Afghanistan, but also because of a lack of investment in the relevant infrastructure as well. Now that you had CPEC, uh, that story or that idea of sort of linking with Central Asia and using the locational advantage that Pakistan had, because these countries, of course, are landlocked, um, to give them access to the sea. So that sort of idea starts gaining more traction as well now that the Chinese are on board. And in 2014, they formed, both sides formed what is known as a joint working group. And a joint working group, basically, as far as the institutional structure of CPEC is concerned, sort of is a forum for experts from both sides to come together to talk about what are the projects that are required in a particular field. This could be in the area of energy, this could be in the area of industrial relocation, this could be in the area of transport. And Gwadar's importance can be gauged from the fact that Gwadar gets its own joint working group, which is formed pretty early on during these interactions on CPEC in 2014. So Gwadar becomes very central to uh, the sort of idea of CPEC as well. And we can see how that sort of pans out in terms of maps that are officially sort of released by the government of Pakistan as well. Gwadar is right there on the bottom left corner of the map, and it's linked to all the way through to Kashgar, again through a series of motorways, through a series of highway projects that run throughout Pakistan as well. So again, that sort of importance or that endpoint sort of salience of Gwadar sort of comes across as far as these official maps or these early official maps of CPEC are concerned. And then CPEC sort of, or Gwadar sort of gains a life of its own as far as Pakistan's policymakers and technocrats are concerned as well. And during my interviews in Islamabad in 2019, for example, the kind of language that comes across to describe Gwadar is very, very interesting to think about. So, senior politicians that I interviewed in 2019 notes, CPEC is the flagship project of the BRI, and CPEC and Gwadar is CPEC's crown jewel. So again, that sort of importance that Gwadar sort of achieved by this time really comes across in these interviews with Pakistani policymakers. Another one argued it is the pivot around which CPEC revolves. So everything is going to revolve around CPEC, and that's the central link which is sort of keeping all of this together. Uh, Ideas about development sort of come to the fore as well, where the sort of this particular technocrat talked about how they want to make Gwadar green and a sustainable city, a city of the future rather than of the past. And notions of scientific development sort of come to the fore as well. That we want to develop Gwadar in a way which is scientific. We want to uh, do proper urban planning. We want to ensure that the city sort of becomes, I mean, in 2019, the best sort of metaphor that one came across about Gwadar, of course, was Dubai, and the other one, of course, was Shanghai. But those are the kind of metaphors, and that's the kind of discourse that one comes across as far as Gwadar is concerned. And as I mentioned to you earlier, uh, regional integration sort of emerges as one of those recurring sort of themes as well. And this regional integration, of course, does not include India, but it's sort of looking to the west and towards Eurasia and Central Asia as opposed to towards the east. So along with this process of increasing, sort of traction as far as Gwadar is concerned, we find a process of what we refer to in the paper as a process of administrative deepening. What do we mean by a process of administrative deepening? Uh, so as I mentioned to you earlier, the state's imprint in peripheral regions, be they in Pakistan or be they in other parts of the world, uh, is limited, right? So the state's interaction or the state's importance to these areas, if they're not rich in natural resources, is likely to be limited, which basically means that the administrative structure of the state is likely to be very rudimentary in the way that it operates. Now, after CPEC and after the BRI and after all of this has happened, there has been this process of administrative deepening that's taken place in Gwadar. And you've got a plethora of federal as well as provincial government agencies that have been given the mandate to develop Gwadar. Uh, some of these organizations include the Gwadar Port Authority. So even though the sort of operator of the port is the CPEC, the eventual owner of the port is the federal government of Pakistan, uh, and the sort of organization which is the sort of which is tasked by the government uh, to sort of ensure its ownership or ensure that whatever happens is as per what they require is the Gwadar Port Authority. Then you've got another authority called the Gwadar Development Authority. So the Port Authority's purview is only till the port. The Development Authority has a much greater purview in terms of its sort of impact on development spending is concerned. That is a provincial government, that government organization which reports to the government of Balochistan. Its funding comes from the federal government as well. And then you've got other federal departments that are required with a functional port. These include customs, these includes tax authorities, sanitary, phytosanitary, all of those organizations that you can think of uh, are now present in Gwadar. And they, as I mentioned earlier, they were not there earlier. The Gwadar district government as well, which has always been there, has gained greater importance as well because of the fact that they are the ones uh, who control the land. So state land at the end of the day, the sort of is enshrined or is taken care of by the district government of Gwadar. So Gwadar is a district within the province of Balochistan. And because you've all of these mega projects that are now being executed in Gwadar, so access to state land becomes really important. So the district government in in Gwadar becomes an important actor as well. And along with these sort of administrative units, you have the establishment of a university. It's a skeleton university at the moment. They had a college that they upgraded to a university. However, again, it's interesting to see how the state sort of ramping up its presence, its administrative presence in a formerly peripheral area. The other area which is important for us to think about, and once again, we can think about why this is the case, well, is the expansion of the state's security footprint within this peripheral region. Balochistan has always been restive. There's a low level insurgency that's ongoing in Balochistan as well. Chinese interests in the province, not from today, but earlier periods as well, 2004, when the construction of the port was ongoing, have regularly been hurt and been targeted uh, by extremists or terrorists. You can take your pick. And that's why there's a expansion as far as the state security footprint is concerned as well. Um, because the Chinese have raised at multiple forums this idea about or this sort of this feeling about security. So therefore, the Pakistan Army has raised a special division which operated in the north of the country in Chinese projects or Chinese funded projects as well, or those projects where there is a sizable number of Chinese workers and managers present. And this division is tasked solely with protecting Chinese workers and with protecting Chinese interests within Gwadar as well. Soon after the port came into, or soon after CPEC was launched in 2018, the Navy itself launched a special marine battalion as well to protect the port. And again, there has been a mushroom growth of other law enforcement agencies as well. One of the most interesting projects that we can think of as far as this security sort of securitization or security related deepening is concerned is the Safe City project. And again, these are not only in Gwadar. There have been a number of these Safe City projects throughout the world where governments are deploying technology as a means of increasing surveillance. And a large number of Chinese firms, of course, have come under a lot of scrutiny for these safe city projects as well. And in Pakistan, for example, many of these projects have been executed by Huawei, but other firms are important as well. And then, of course, there's the Gwadar Cantonment Project. The, wherever the Pakistan Army sort of established itself, it has a cantonment as well where the military installations are. And this is a huge, huge project. Around 12,000 acres of land has been earmarked for the cantonment alone. But what's interesting to see is uh, that there's a persistent militarization, yes. However, civilian law enforcement, despite the process of administrative deepening that we looked at earlier, uh, seems to be much more limited despite Gawadar's increasing importance. So one of the sort of variables that we can use or proxy variables that we can use to sort of corroborate this is the number of police stations that are there in Gwadar, a very imperfect Maya. However, the number of police stations in Gwadar from 2008 to 2022 has actually gone down from 5 to 4. So even though the military's presence in Gwadar has increased exponentially during this period, civilian law enforcement or the presence of civilian law enforcement seems to have gone down, which again is an interesting thing to think about when we talk about the Pakistani state and its sort of relationship with the Chinese. All right. And that brings us to this idea uh, of what we refer to in the paper as outsourced development. So, in this mode of outsourced development, where we have a sort of location which has been for a long period of time uh, a periphery as far as the nation state is concerned, not only the nation state, but the province within which it's located. Gwadar is a periphery within Balochistan as well. So, in this mode or model of outsourced development, Chinese non-state actors, because they could be SOEs but for our purpose, they're non-state actors, uh, take on many of the responsibilities that the state does in the provision not only of infrastructure but also in the provision of public services, because the host state's ability to provide this critical infrastructure and these access to these services is limited. And in the case of Balochistan, this is a function of Gwadar as well as Balochistan's larger peripherality within Pakistan's state structure as well. And this responsibility sort of goes beyond the provision of financial capital. It also includes the provision of human capital. And the host state has outsourced the provision of these sort of different forms of capital to Chinese stakeholders. And that is where China communication comes back as well, because China communication seems to be that one state owned enterprise which has a stake in all of the projects that are Chinese finance or most of the Chinese finance projects uh, in this case. But what's interesting in this model of outsourced development is that the agency of these actors is circumscribed, right? They do not have absolute agency in terms of doing what they want to do because they do not have sovereignty over this period of over this sort of parcel of land. So that means that their ability to deliver whatever it is that they deliver to whichever stakeholder and their ability to push through what they want is limited. And in order to deal with this circumscribed sort of an agency, they need to work through local power structures and adapt themselves to the local political economy. These power structures could be multiple different entities, right? So this could be the district government, this could be the Gwadar Port Authority, this could be the Gwadar Development Authority, it could be law enforcement agencies. There are a number of layers of both state as well as non-state actors that these organizations or these actors must work through in order to achieve whatever, once again, uh, they want to achieve. And Chinese funding is extremely important in this whole scheme of things as well. So once again, when we talk about Gwadar, the fact that there's been such limited progress on operationalizing the port, uh, on sort of on providing public services to people living in Gwadar, is a function uh, of the sort of limited fiscal space that the Pakistani state has and its own development priorities as well. But fiscal space is important. And we can see within the social sector as well, we can see how a number of projects that the Chinese uh, that were in doldrums before the Chinese actually stepped in have now either been completed or are in stages of completion. These include water supply. So once again, Gwadar being an arid area, water supply is a key problem. And in order to supply water, the sort of the best way is to have desalination, even though it's extremely costly. It's problematic to run. However, before the Chinese stepped in, the kind of progress that you saw on the provision of clean drinking water, which is absolutely essential, not only for all of these grandiose plans that the Chinese and the Pakistanis have, but also for the population of the city as well. Um, they were they were sort of meandering along because of a lack of access to resources. The Chinese came in, and within 2 years, we've had this water supply project being completed. Civic planning, once again, not the purview of not what you would expect from state-owned enterprises. However, in this case, the Gwadar master plan was completed by a bureau of China Communication. Hospitals, technical education, uh, environmental systems, boat making, anything you can name under the sun, these are projects that are being financed by the Chinese. Similar is the case with infrastructure. And what's interesting, once again, from this perspective, is to see the sort of funding that's being provided. So, unlike many projects across the Belt and Road Initiative and also in CPEC, a large portion of the money that's being provided by the Chinese state through whichever policy bank is either in the form of grants or it is concessional. So once again, that sort of highlights the importance that's given to Gwadar as well. And the other point which is important is the role of China communication, which I am extremely interested in trying to unpack, but that's extremely difficult to do as well. So all of these projects, if you see, are sort of agents or they're part of China communication. Uh, Now the allocation of federal funding as well. A large portion of that money is gone towards infrastructure projects, security, and social projects. But what's interesting once again to see is the uptick in foreign funding for this total allocation. So allocated money does not always equal to money that's spent on the ground. The state allocates money if it's fiscally constrained. The first sort of axe to fall is on development spending. So from 2013 to 2015, only 2% of the total allocation was for foreign funded projects, and this number increases quite substantially during the corresponding period as well. As I said, a large portion of this money has gone towards roads, infrastructure, but the social sector hasn't really received a lot of spending. And what we see in the data is that those projects that are locally funded, there is a huge time gap between the conception of the project and its actual completion. The part of it has to do, as I said earlier, with the fiscal capacity of the state, Pakistan, of course, is going through an IMF, program at this point as well. So the state's ability to fund a lot of these projects is limited, but it's also has to do with the state's own priorities as well. All right. So what's the challenge of outsourced development? So I gave you this whole spiel about how your agency is severely circumscribed as well, and we can see the limits of this model of outsourced development. In the case of China Overseas Ports Holding Company, we can see that the kind of challenges that came that came to the fore in terms of the PSA-led consortium, those sort of challenges are being faced by COPHC as well, despite the kind of support that it is getting from the Chinese state and despite the kind of relationship that exists between the Pakistani and the Chinese state. And the biggest problem they have, of course, is the access to land, because they want to, at least in theory and in terms of what they say, they need access to land in order to expand the free zone. Because when firms come into these free zones, it is only then that COPHC will start making money, if we sort of think of it as a rational economic actor. Um, and the problem is that the defense organizations that weren't willing to sort of give land earlier to PSA, they are showing reticence in terms of handing over land at this point as well. And this 2021 report talks about how, despite the fact that the PM office sort of pushed these organizations to hand over land, uh, they weren't really very successful in terms of doing it. It's changed now, but that's the kind of challenge that they face. Now, what do the Pakistanis say, right? So it's an interesting thing to think about from the Pakistani perspective as well. Uh, so on the second phase of the free zone, this technocrat that I talked to argued, we've handed over most of the land to the Chinese actors. These are just delaying tactics from their end, as it is only 200 odd acres out of the total area of more than 2,000 acres that we need to give to them. The Chinese, have been unable to bring in the investment that was promised, right? So from the Pakistani perspective, uh, despite the fact that the Pakistanis have created all of these institutional structures to help the Chinese, etc., the Chinese actor, in this case COPHC, has not been forthcoming in terms of meeting its obligations. And then there are other institutional constraints that these firms sort of face as well. There are differences over taxes, exemptions, um, and incentives that are offered to these Chinese firms to come in and set up shop. Power supply remains a major issue. So remember, I told you how in 1999 there was an agreement with Iran to supply 100 megawatts of power to Gwadar. Uh, Gwadar is still not linked to the national grid. Gwadar still does not have a functional power plant, standalone power plant as well. Uh, Last year, the government of Pakistan signed another agreement with the Iranians to supply an additional 100 megawatts of power. So the fact that the Pakistani state has sort of gone forward and then backward on setting up a coal-based power plant is sort of highlighted as that sort of as sort of an uh, a lack of clarity as far as the Pakistani state is concerned about what they want to achieve out of this project. The security situation, of course, remains extremely precarious. And then, last but not the least, local perceptions about the role of both the Pakistani state as well as Chinese actors is negative. For those of you who follow the Belt and Road Initiative, 2022 and in 2023, there were protests that took place in Gwadar, not so much against the Chinese and what they were doing in Gwadar, but against all of those things that I mentioned to you earlier. Access to clean drinking water, access to healthcare, access to education, um, access to sanitation, all of those things uh, were missing. So again, despite the fact that the port has been operational for 15, 16 odd years, access to healthcare, education, energy, clean drinking water remains extremely limited. for the common people in Gwadar as well. The Chinese come in terms of illegal fishing, which, because a large portion of the population in Gwadar depends on fishing for their livelihoods, they argue that since the Chinese have, sort of turned their eyes towards Gwadar, illegal fishing has gone up in the area, and the local fishermen can just not compete against this commercial level of fishing. So that's where the sort of Chinese come in as far as those Gwadar projects are concerned. And of course, Pakistan's inherent political instability plays a role in sort of reducing the ability of these Chinese actors to get things done. Uh, Lastly, just uh, in this latest round of interviews, as I mentioned to you earlier, we were able to sample an interesting group of people. And then we looked at their perceptions of Gwadar and CPEC and the major sort of arguments that they make in order to support their arguments as well. So bureaucrats, their views are positive. There's no surprise over there. As agents of the state, uh, they are beneficiaries of the resources that are coming into the place, and they are, sort of their importance within, again, the institutional structure, being a part of Gwadar, has raised over time as well. And the positive impacts that they argue since CPEC and Gwadar port have come, have become operational are Chinese investments come in. There's an improved connectivity. So there's a road from Gwadar to Karachi built earlier. Uh, Gwadar is strategically located as well. Development spending has gone up. And along with the development spending, there has been an increase in economic opportunities for local people. Academics, they're largely positive. They are also, sort of cognizant of the improvements that have taken place in the infrastructure. Educational facilities have developed, for example, the university, and they agree that development spending has gone up. However, uh, they are wary of the continued sort of peripheralization as far as Gwadar is concerned in terms of its of how people perceive the area and in terms of some of the spending on social areas. So they point out how healthcare facilities, which were there were two hospitals, government run hospitals that operated in Gwadar in 2011. Even now, there are only two government run hospitals that operate in Gwadar, and those two are of extremely sort of limited quality. Now the Chinese have built a hospital, and now it's becoming operational. Local politicians and NGOs, on the other hand, they're much more negative in terms of their views around Gwadar, and they highlight a number of negative impacts that the port's development and all of these wonderful projects that are coming in have had on local people. Uh, Given the Pakistani state's character, the centralization of decision making remains a persistent problem. And that comes across the fore as well. So they argue that decisions as far as their lives and their livelihoods are concerned are not being made within Gwadar. They're actually made either in Islamabad or in Beijing. So they do not see themselves as being partners as far as all of these wonderful, wonderful infrastructure projects are concerned. There's also this notion of displacement. The fact, as I mentioned to you earlier, that the Baloch are a small percentage of Pakistan's total population, their local leaders are wary that if the economy sort of booms, if all of these projects take place, because locals are not trained, the state has not spent money in terms of educating local people, uh, sort of providing the technical and vocational skills that are required to take advantage. So therefore, they're likely to be displaced when those jobs are eventually created by people coming from other uh, parts of the province. Poverty, the fact once again that they were shown these sort of red roses when Gwadar was thought of and when the project started. And even now, Gwadar remains one of the persistently poorer parts of Balochistan. Connectivity, despite the roads being built, they do not have access to connectivity. Some of the new infrastructure that's been built as well, they're not able to access it, not because of security, but because those infrastructure projects are aimed for commercial traffic as opposed to local traffic. The provision of services, local involvement, employment opportunities, and human capital. And similar to the fact that the officers say that a lot of investment has come in, these people argue that the investment that's come in has been very narrowly targeted. It's not created employment opportunities for them. Uh, and overall, what's sad perhaps to see is this feeling of hopelessness, as opposed to, sort of one would think that all of this money coming in gives them hope. Uh, on that, I'd like to finish with this particular image. So the road that you see on the right, which is right next to the sea, is called the East Bay Expressway. It was built by a Chinese firm with Chinese funding. China Communications built this road, a 19-kilometer, brilliant road for heavy traffic. But it passes through the old city and area which is called Mulaband. Uh, and this is traditionally the area where fishermen are located. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, a large portion of the population in Gwadar depends on fishing. And this used to be open coastline, right? So you could have your boat anywhere along this coastline and you could just take it out into the sea. Now, what the construction of this expressway has done is that the access to the sea where you're going to get your livelihood from has been severely curtailed. If you see the three arrows that I've placed in on the figure, uh, the China Communications created these uh, three bridges where fishermen could park their boats and then go out into the sea. But the fishermen argue that this is their land and this was their access to their livelihoods. Now, in the name of development, the Pakistanis and the Chinese have come in and they've built this infrastructure which they cannot use once again. This is only for heavy traffic. And at the same time, their ability to go out into the sea has been curtailed. So the centuries and centuries of the way in which they've been doing their stuff, uh, the state has now, in the name of development, effectively stopped them. And I leave you guys with this picture, beautiful picture of the port, 2019, while I was there. I hope I'm on time, David and Jana. And yeah, I look forward to questions. Thank you.